The first day of school is supposed to be a fresh start. For most kids, it means new notebooks, new teachers, and maybe a little bit of nervous energy in their stomachs. For Jamal, though, it wasn't nerves that churned inside him. It was something closer to anticipation, like a runner before the sound of the starting pistol. He stepped onto the cracked pavement of Crestwood High's parking lot with his head upright, his stride steady, the morning sunlight glinting faintly off the edges of his backpack zipper. To most, he looked like any other transfer student, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying the quietness of someone still figuring out where he belonged. But Jamal knew something they didn't. He was built differently, inside and out. He could feel eyes on him as soon as he walked through the front entrance. That was something he'd gotten used to over the years, the way people stared at someone who didn't fit into their perfect little puzzle. Being black in a mostly white neighborhood was already enough to draw attention, but adding the fact that he was new, unfamiliar, and unafraid that made him a magnet for whispers. Kids leaned against lockers, scanning him with quick, judging glances. Teachers peered over their glasses, making mental notes. Jamal didn't flinch, didn't falter. His face remained calm, his posture relaxed. He'd learned long ago that letting people read fear on you was the fastest way to invite trouble. Trouble, as it turned out, didn't need much of an invitation. At Crestwood High, by the time he found his assigned locker a dented, graffiti-scribbled metal box halfway down the east hall, he had already felt the shift in the air. Laughter spiked behind him, sharp and mocking, and then came the heavy footsteps of boys who walked like they owned the place. He turned slightly, catching them in his peripheral vision. 3 of them. They moved with lazy arrogance, the kind of confidence born not from real strength, but from years of unchecked cruelty. Fresh meat. The tallest one muttered loudly enough for everyone within earshot to hear. His words were followed by snickers from his 2 shadows. The hallway seemed to tilt, every nearby student suddenly more interested in watching than in getting to class. Jamal bent down to unzip his backpack, ignoring them for the moment, sliding his notebooks onto the narrow shelf of his locker. The tall one closed the distance in 3 strides. "Hey, new guy," he drawled, leaning one shoulder against the locker beside Jamal's. His voice was thick with mockery, every syllable dripping. "Superiority? You must not know how things work here. We've got rules at Crestwood." Jamal didn't look at him. He stacked his books neatly, his movements deliberate, as though the bully wasn't even worth acknowledgement. That act of indifference only poured gasoline on the fire. With a grin that didn't reach his eyes, the tall boy slapped Jamal's stack of books out of his hands, sending them skittering across the dirty tile floor. The sound echoed. Pages fanned out. Loose papers fluttered like broken wings. Laughter erupted from his 2 friends. And even some of the onlookers who should have known better cracked nervous smiles. Relieved that for once, sit wasn't them. "Rule number 1, the tall one said, stepping forward so he loomed over Jamal. "You don't talk back to us?" His breath smelled like cheap energy drinks and stale gum. "You don't even look at us unless we let you." "Got it?" Jamal bent down slowly, gathering his books one by one. His silence wasn't weakness. It was patience, something his uncle had drilled into him over and over again. The first strike isn't always the one you throw with your fists, Jamal. Sometimes the first strike is in your mind. Sometimes it's in making them think you're smaller than you are. So he didn't react. Not yet. He let the bullies laugh, let the crowd snicker. He straightened, his eyes calm, his expression unreadable. To the hallway full of students, it looked like he had swallowed his pride, like he was too scared to say or do anything. But inside, Jamal's mind was already turning, already cataloging every movement, every weakness. The tall one leaned too, heavily on his left leg, shorter one with the scar across his chin, overcompensated with his right shoulder when he laughed. The last one, the thick-set one with the buzz cut, kept shifting on his feet like he was ready to impress the others. By throwing the first punch, Jamal didn't just see bullies. He saw openings, but he wasn't here to start a fight. He knew what it would mean if he lashed out on the first day suspension. Labels, whispers that he was violent, dangerous, another stereotype come to life. No, he had to wait. And waiting required control. So Jamal let them walk away after one last shove to his shoulder. He let the laughter follow him like a shadow all the way to his first class. But the seed had been planted. The moment those books hit the floor, Jamal knew this wasn't going to be a one-time thing. Bullies didn't stop until they were forced to stop. He'd seen it before, at his last school, where kids like them ruled the halls while teachers turned blind eyes. He remembered the bruises he'd seen on smaller kids, the way fear silenced whole classrooms. And he remembered the first time he stepped in, first time his fists had spoken louder than words. That night, after trudging home with a head full of thoughts, Jamal dropped his bag by the door and went straight to his room. His mother asked how his first day had gone, and he answered with the same quiet calm he always wore. It was fine. She didn't push. She knew better than to pry too deep when he wasn't ready. Once he was alone, he pulled the small wooden box from under his bed. Inside lay the old cloth wraps his uncle had given him years ago, frayed at the edges but still strong. He sat on the edge of his bed and began wrapping his hands, the ritual familiar, grounding. He could almost hear his uncle's voice in the back of his mind. Discipline before destruction. Don't let anger be the one holding your fists, boy. Let control guide you. Jamal shadowboxed in the dim light, his movements sharp but fluid. He wasn't just throwing punches, he was rehearsing, preparing. He thought about the hallway, about the way the tall boy had leaned too far forward, the way his friends had circled like hyenas. Jamal's mind was already choreographing the fight he knew was coming. It's not because he wanted it, but because he understood people like them. They wouldn't let him walk away forever. And when they crossed the line again, he'd be ready. Lying in bed later that night, Jamal stared at the ceiling, his muscles still humming from the workout. The house was quiet except for the faint creak of pipes in the walls. His mother was asleep down the hall, her breathing soft, tired from another long shift at the diner. Jamal thought about her sacrifices, about the way she worked 2 jobs, just to keep the lights on. He thought about his uncle, the man who had raised him when his father walked out, who had taught him to turn pain into power. Most of all, he thought about the kids at Crestwood, the ones who had looked down when the bullies laughed, the ones who had smiled nervously just to avoid being next. He clenched his fists beneath the covers. This wasn't just about him. He knew it already. If he let those boys keep ruling the school, nothing would change. But if he stood his ground, if he waited for the right moment, then maybe he could do more than just defend himself. Maybe he could set a fire inside that place, a fire that burned away the fear. So as he drifted into sleep, Jamal wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. He was waiting for it. Waiting with patience, with control, with the kind of discipline that turned an ordinary boy into something much, much more. The bullies thought they had found easy prey in the new kid. What they didn't know was that they had stumbled into the quiet storm that had been brewing for years. And storms, once they break, don't ask for permission. The next morning dawned gray and heavy. It's a kind of day where the clouds pressed low and the air felt thick with unspoken tension. Jamal moved through his morning routine in silence, his mother already gone for her early shift at the diner. He ate quickly, laced his sneakers tight, and left for school with the same quiet confidence in his step. On the outside, he looked like any other kid headed to class. On the inside, he was braced for what he knew was coming. Bullies never let things end with a shove in the hallway. To them, humiliation was a performance, and Jamal had been cast as their next unwilling star. The only question was when and where they'd strike again. By mid-morning, he had his answer. Gym class, the coach. A wiry man who seemed more interested in checking his phone than actually supervising had sent the students outside to run laps. But the bullies had other plans. Jamal noticed them whispering near the bleachers, their eyes flicking toward him again and again. When the coach wandered off toward the equipment shed, the trio made their move. "Yo, new kid," the leader called, his voice sharp with false friendliness. He waved Jamal over, his grin wide and mocking. "Need to have a little talk." Jamal could have ignored them, could have kept jogging, pretended he hadn't heard. But he knew that running now would only feed their hunger. So he jogged over calmly, sweat dampening his shirt, his breathing even. A circle of curious students began to form around the bleachers, sensing drama, eager for blood. The bullies thrived on an audience. And today, they had one. The tall leader stepped forward, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed into slits. "Thought we told you yesterday? Don't act like you don't hear us when we're talking to you." "That's strike two." Jamal didn't answer. He just stood there, hands at his sides, shoulders relaxed. His silence was infuriating to them. It was supposed to be fear, but it didn't look like fear. It looked like patience, and patience unnerved. Them. The shorter one, the one with the scar on his chin, leaned closer, sneering. "You think you're tough or something? You think not talking makes you a man? We'll see how tough you are when you're on the ground crying for mommy." He spat, the glob landing on Jamal's sneakers. The crowd gasped. Phones tilted higher to record. Jamal's eyes lowered to the spittle, then back up to the boy's face. His expression didn't change. Not anger, not disgust, just calm. And that calmness was more threatening than anything he could have shouted. Buzz cut. The third boy couldn't take it anymore. He wanted to be the first to prove himself. With a sudden lunge, he threw a punch wild, undisciplined, born of ego, rather than skill. But Jamal had been waiting. He sidestepped with fluid precision, his hand snapping out to catch the boy's wrist. In the same motion, he twisted, leveraging the boy's own weight against him. Buzzcut hit the ground with a thud that rattled through the wooden bleachers, his face contorting in shock and pain. A murmur rippled through the crowd, the tone shifting from eager laughter to stunned disbelief. The tall leader reacted instantly. Charging forward in a blind attempt to overwhelm, Jamal met him with a jab to the stomach so quick the boy barely saw it coming. The leader doubled over, gasping for air, his body folding like a broken hinge. Jamal followed it with a controlled hook to the ribs hard enough to drop him to one knee, but not hard enough to break anything. He wanted to hurt them, yes, but not destroy them. Scarchin hesitated for half a heartbeat, his bravado faltering. He had expected Jamal to crumble, to beg, to run. Instead, his two friends were on the ground, groaning and clutching themselves. But pride wouldn't let him back down, not with so many eyes watching. With a frustrated snarl, he swung at Jamal's face. The punch whistled through empty air. Jamal had already ducked low, pivoting on his heel, his elbows snapping upward in a brutal but controlled strike. It caught Scarchin under the chin, snapping his head back and sending him stumbling into the bleacher rail with a sickening clang. He crumpled, dazed, clutching his jaw, and just like that, it was over. The crowd stood frozen, the silence heavy and electric. Three boys who had ruled the halls for years, who had made dozens of kids miserable, lay sprawled and broken in under. A minute. Jamal stood over them, calm as ever, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He hadn't broken a sweat. He hadn't lost his composure. He had dismantled them with the precision of a surgeon, the ruthlessness of a warrior, and the restraint of someone who knew exactly how far to go. He bent down, gripping the tall leader by the collar, pulling him just close enough to hear. His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of unshakable certainty. "This is your last chance. Leave me alone. Leave everyone else alone. Cross this line again and I won't stop. Where I did today." He shoved the boy back down, letting go, and stepped away. The murmurs started almost immediately. Shock gave way to whispers. Whispers gave way to gasps. Phones buzzed as clips of the fight were shared in real time. The story was already spreading. Like wildfire, by the end of the day, the whole school would know. Jamal didn't wait around to bask in it. He turned and walked away, his back straight, his movements deliberate. He didn't need their cheers. He didn't need their validation. All he needed was the knowledge that he had sent a message, one too loud to ignore. That evening, back in his room, Jamal unwrapped his knuckles. The cloth strips faintly damp with sweat. His hands ached slightly, but there were no cuts, no bruises. Worth mentioning, he flexed his fingers, the motion easy, practiced. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wraps for a long time. His uncle's words came back to him. "Strength isn't about how hard you hit, Jamal. It's about knowing when to stop. He replayed the fight in his mind. Every move had been efficient, controlled, designed to incapacitate but not maim. He had stopped at the exact line his uncle had always told him to, and that control, that discipline, was what set him apart. But he also knew this wasn't over. Bullies rarely learned lessons the first time. Their pride had been shattered, their egos bruised, and boys like them didn't heal quietly. It would come back, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not the next day, but eventually. And when they did, Jamal would be ready. As night fell, Jamal sat by his window, the cool air brushing against his face. He could see the lights of the city in the distance, glowing faintly against the horizon. His mother called from down the hall, asking if he'd eaten. He answered softly, telling her yes, though his stomach was too knotted to care about food. What lingered in his mind wasn't fear, it was something deeper, sharper, a sense of responsibility. Because when he'd looked out into that crowd, when he'd seen the wide eyes of kids who had been victims for years, he realized something. He hadn't just fought for himself today, he had fought for them. And in doing so, he had shifted something. Inside Crestwood High, the bullies had lost their grip, if only for a moment, and Jamal had shown everyone that the reign of fear wasn't unbreakable. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. Tomorrow would be different. The whispers would follow him through every hallway, the respect would shift in the air. He hadn't asked for it, but he had claimed it anyway. The quiet storm inside him had broken. Crestwood High would never look at him or their bullies the same way again by the end of the week. Crestwood High was unrecognizable. Not physically, of course. The walls were still lined with peeling posters. The cafeteria still reeked of soggy fries, and the gym mats still carried the faint stench of sweat. But the energy, the atmosphere, the hierarchy, that had all changed, and all it took was one fight, less than a minute long, for the school's entire social order to tilt. Word of what Jamal had done spread like wildfire. The videos had been posted online within minutes, grainy footage of him dismantling 3 bullies with surgical precision. Every detail of the fight had been analyzed, replayed, and whispered about. Some said he'd trained as a boxer, others swore he was a black belt, while a few kids even claimed he'd been in street gangs back where he came from. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was that the 3 self-proclaimed kings of Crestwood were dethroned, and Jamal had done it without breaking a sweat. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him. Some filled with fear, some with admiration, some with a mix of both. The same kids who had once shrunk away from the bullies now gave Jamal small nods of gratitude when they passed him in the halls. Freshmen who used to walk with their heads down now lifted their chins a little higher. Even teachers seemed to tread carefully, their gazes lingering on Jamal, as if trying to decide whether he was trouble or something else entirely. The bullies themselves were a different story. The leader showed up 2 days later with a deep bruise, spreading across his ribs, moving slower than usual, his laughter forced and brittle. Scarchin kept his mouth shut for once, his jaw still sore, his smirk gone. Buzzcut didn't even make eye contact. He moved through the halls, like a ghost, haunted by his own defeat. Their dominance was gone, stripped away in a single afternoon. And though they tried to muster bravado, tried to act as if nothing had changed, the tremor in their voices gave them away. Everyone knew they had been broken. For Jamal, the strangest part was how quickly the respect turned into something heavier. It wasn't just that people admired him, it was that they expected something from him now. Every time a smaller kid walked a little taller in the hallway, Jamal felt the weight of their silent hope pressing against his shoulders. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't come to Crestwood to be a savior. He'd come here to get an education, to keep his head down, to make his mom proud. But now, whether he liked it or not, he was a symbol. One afternoon, as Jamal was leaving class, a boy barely 5 feet tall with glasses too big for his face hurried up to him. "Hey, Jamal?" The boy stammered, clutching his books against his chest. Jamal slowed, turning to face him. I wanted to say thanks. Those guys, they used to mess with me all the time. They haven't looked at me since. Since you know? Jamal gave him a small smile, patting him on the shoulder. Good, keep your head up. The boy's eyes widened, as if those 4 simple words were more than advice, they were armor. But the moment that truly shifted everything came a week later, when the principal called him into her office. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Principal Rayner was a sharp woman, her eyes hidden behind thin wire glasses. She gestured for Jamal to sit. "I've been hearing a lot about you lately," she said, her voice careful, measured, and not just from students. "I've seen the video." She paused, studying him. "You handled yourself differently than most boys your age would have. You didn't lose control. You didn't escalate beyond what was necessary. That tells me something about you." Jamal sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees. He wasn't sure where this was going, but he held her gaze. She leaned forward. "We have a martial arts program here at Crestwood. It's been dying out, not many students interested. But I think, with the right leadership, it could thrive again. You have the discipline, Jamal. Not just the skill. Discipline. And I'd like to recommend you not just to join, but to help lead." The words landed heavy. Lead. He hadn't thought about himself that way. Fighting had always been about survival, about control, about defending what was his. But now, could it be more? Could it be about teaching, about giving others the tools to stand strong too? He left the principal's office that day with his mind spinning. The offer wasn't just about a club, it was about stepping into a role he hadn't asked for, but one that felt impossible to turn away from. At home, Jamal sat by the window that night, his uncle's words echoing louder than ever. Strength isn't about how hard you hit. It's about knowing when to stop. And sometimes it's about teaching others how to start. He thought about the faces of the kids who looked at him differently now, the younger boy who'd thanked him, a freshman who no longer flinched when they walked past the bleachers, his mother working herself to exhaustion so he could have opportunities she never did. If he turned his back now, if he pretended that fight was just about him, he'd be wasting something bigger. The next week, Jamal showed up to the gym for the first martial arts club meeting. A handful of students were there, awkward and uncertain. Most of them kids who had spent years at the bottom of the school's food chain. They looked at him with wide eyes, waiting for him to say something. He stood at the front, silent for a moment, then spoke in that same steady voice he had used. "To warn the bullies, I'm not here to make you fighters, not the way you're thinking. I'm here to teach you discipline, control, how to stand when someone tries to push you down. Fighting isn't about showing off. It's about protecting yourself and protecting others." They listened, hanging on every word. And in that moment, Jamal realized that his uncle's lessons weren't just living inside him. They were spreading, multiplying. Weeks passed, and the club grew. Word got around, and soon kids who had once been afraid to even speak up were practicing stances, learning balance, feeling power flow through their limbs for the first time. Jamal wasn't just teaching them how to fight, he was teaching them how to walk taller, how to face the world without shrinking. The bullies, for their part, never fully recovered. They tried once or twice to regain their old dominance, but the fear was gone. The students they once preyed on no longer cowered. And worse, every time they looked at Jamal, they saw their own defeat replaying in their heads. Eventually, their reign faded, and they became just 3 more boys in a school, where their names no longer carried weight. Months later, Jamal stood in the middle of the gym, watching a group of younger students practice. Their movements were clumsy, but they were trying, and that effort mattered more than anything. A smile tugged at his lips, rare but genuine. He wasn't just the new kid anymore. He wasn't just the brutal fighter who had destroyed the bullies. He was something more, a leader, a protector, a teacher, and in the end, that was the true fight. Not the punches thrown under the bleachers, not the bruises on the bullies' bodies. The real fight was in changing the balance of power and showing everyone that fear wasn't unbreakable, that even the quietest among them could rise. The bullies had picked the wrong new boy, and in doing so, they had unleashed something they couldn't control. They had awakened not just a fighter, but a force that turned Crestwood high upside down. Jamal didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His victory wasn't in their defeat. It was in the strength that now lived in every student who had once felt powerless, And as he left the gym that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the basketball court, Jamal knew one thing for certain. He hadn't just survived Crestwood High. He had transformed its story end